Good morning, everybody. How are we doing today? I believe it's a Wednesday here in the great kingdom of jazz. Uh, Got a fun episode for you today. It might be a little controversial, but never shied away from that too much. I am going to propose what potentially could have been the greatest group in jazz. And it's only due to the shortness of their body of work time together that they're probably not the greatest band in jazz history. But I was still going to argue that the two records that they did make are superior to most things out there. It's high level stuff. And what you have is three superstars all on the cusp of immortality and greatness, and two other players who hold their own in every sense of the word. And when you ask the question, what is the greatest jazz band group of all time, you'll get the Miles First Quintet, arguably the second Miles Quintet affair, the great Coltrane Quartet, some of the great jazz messenger lineups. There's plenty of people out there, and of course there's other eras as well. You talk about Dizzy and Parker playing together. There's just a lot of things to look at. Ellington's group is one of the greatest groups of all time. You know, how Ellington used that group. However, this group that I'm going to propose has such a modernity to it that's leading the field at the time it's being made. And when you compare it to other things around it at that time, it's kind of leaps and bounds ahead of its competition. The level of ability of the players in this group is just unrivaled. And had we not lost the greatest member of this group very early on in this process, what would this group have gone on to do? That's the real question. And it's in that question where we can really ask ourselves, could this have been the greatest jazz group of all time? And under the radar, they quietly have been one of the greatest groups of all time. And this group comes from a semblance of an earlier incantation, but this specific moment, and I'm not going to be mysterious any longer, I'm talking about the great Clifford Brown and Max Roach Quintet. However, I'm not speaking about this iteration of the group with Harold Land in the group. And I'm a huge Harold Land guy, and I think he absolutely plays with Max and Clifford in a wonderful and beautiful way. However, in '54, Howard Land decides he wants to go back to the West Coast and heads off in his own trajectory, which in jazz is a fairly common thing. And so who do they have fill that chair? None other than the great ascending Sonny Rollins. And so what you have here for a brief moment, the greatest trumpet player and probably the greatest soloist jazz has ever seen in terms of clarity, viscosity, melodic phrasing, rhythmic patterns. He's just so effortless and makes the most difficult things sound completely like natural. And to me, innovation is always somehow interwoven with it coming naturally. And so many of the greatest players in jazz, it's not about intellect, it's not about knowledge, it's about a natural progression that happened, but everybody else had to use math and numbers to try to comprehend what they did. Monk wasn't an intellectual in that sense. He was playing in a natural way for him. Everybody else had to use knowledge and math to kind of get it. Parker wasn't sitting there going, I'm going to use all these numbers and Dizzy had to break that down. It just came natural to Parker. And for Clifford Brown, the effortlessness of him and his long lyrical lines, there's just nothing else quite like it in the jazz kingdom. Hubbard comes close at times, but lacks a little bit of Clifford Brown's melodic sense. Clifford's always kind of hummable, always kind of carrying the melody and even the lyric of the song in such a natural way. It's just really wonderful. And then you have Max Roach, who's established himself playing with the bebop guys, playing with the Cool Cats, Howard Rumsey out west. He's doing multiple things, Max Roach, and proved himself to be one of the up-and-comers. And he's a giant in his own sense. And then you have Sonny Rollins, who's on the cusp of greatness. Rollins is just, his star is ascending. And him and Coltrane are kind of these two entities that have some similarities but also polarities. And the question kind of was in the jazz canon at that time, who is going to be the greater of these two? And of course, Coltrane slips into the Miles group, which gives him greater exposure. But Coltrane was still a developing creature, as he was most of his career. He was kind of restless. And there's times where that restlessness creates long narratives that are fascinating. But there's other times where it feels like he's chomping at the bit, trying to escape the limitations of a ballad or the song that he's in. He doesn't always play to the piece of the music. He often plays to his own whistle. That train's going down its own tracks, regardless of where Miles and Philly Joe and the rest of the group wants him to go. Coltrane said, I gotta go that way. Rollins is more empathetic to the song. Rollins has as many ideations and wonderful melodic phrasings, and the way he captures lyric at times. Rollins is a special player who was very hungry at this time. And often to me, greatness and ascendancy is affiliated with how hungry and desperate am I. Once you get to a certain level, sometimes that hunger, that desperation, that inspiration becomes tougher to bottle and capture. But Rollins is on that trajectory upward. He's done some good recordings with Monk, and he's making some fine recordings at Prestige. But it's this moment with Clifford Brown where the two have a wonderful sync. When they play and state verses together, there's this wonderful sound of their tone that almost sounds like one horn at times. Add to that mix Bud Powell's brother Richie Powell, who's a really unheralded but brilliant piano player. I'm going to show you some stuff from these two records. And the two records in question are this. On Emersy, the Mercury Jazz imprint, number 36070, probably from 55. Clifford Brown, Max Roach at Basin Street. And Rollins has slipped into the group at this point, taking Harold Land's place. And it changes the sound of the group on quite a lot of levels. I think Harold Land was more just, at this point, a bebop guy playing, trying to keep up tempo with Clifford. And Rollins comes in with this fresh, new tone, new sounds. And what you'll hear in this, what I'm about to show you, here's the second one. This is at Prestige now on Rollins' label. Clifford Brown and Max bring the band over there and they record this. And this has a couple of the most important songs, Pent Up House, Valse Hot. This is some serious stuff. And when I listened to this yesterday, these two records, in preparation for this episode, there's so many things that Clifford Brown does that Miles Davis could also do. And anything Miles Davis does, Clifford Brown can do. Clifford plays ballads beautifully. Plays mid-tempo with clarity. He plays up-tempo in structures, ways, and means that Miles Davis could never dream of. Clifford's a far superior player with all the melodic sensibility that you could ever ask for. And Rollins, to me, in some ways, is a stage ahead of Coltrane at this point in their careers. In 55, 56, 54, Coltrane's still finding his voice. And for comparison's sake, the first great Miles Quintet record on Prestige is going to be kind of contemporaneous with this. The Working, Cooking, Steaming, Relaxing sessions, those are on the cusp of happening. So Miles Quintet's Together is playing live, and it's about to document that stuff in the studio. And don't get me wrong, those Cooking, Working, Steaming, Relaxing are all brilliant. It's a very fine-tuned machine that's well-rehearsed, that's been playing those songs in the club for 6 months, and they track that stuff in an effortless sense. And they're a great candidate for being one of the greatest jazz groups of all time. However, when we dive into this, I want to show you some of the layers here that are fantastic. Some of it's Richie Powell compositions, and he really is a revelation in a lot of ways in a lot of these tracks. And then last of all, you have George Morrow, who's a fantastic bass player who lays down the thunder with Max Roach. And you want to talk about a drummer who can propulse. Next to Art Blakey, there's probably no one with more thunder, and Max is more finite. Max is more precise. Max is a very fine-tuned, pointing needle. Art Blakey's a little bit more of a blunt edge hammer, and he's definitely can play ballads and do. Like you can find Blakey on sessions where you're like, well, you're surprised it's Blakey, no question about it. But Max Roach has such an arsenal of fills and sounds and patterns, and he's a pretty unique star on the Skins at this point. And really, it's Blakey, Max Roach, and Kenny Clark who are kind of the ascended drummers of this era. So in this group, you have the superstar Clifford Brown, who's the second coming of Armstrong and Parker combined. You have Sonny Rollins, who's on the cusp of superstardom in a jazz sense. And you have Max Roach, who's one of the preeminent drummers in the land. You have Bud Powell's brother, Richie, who's a fantastic, brilliant player, who's not struggling with the mental illness and the breakdowns that Bud was struggling with. And then you have George Morrow, who's absolutely capable of playing all those blistering tempos and shadowing Max Roach in a wonderful sense. Let me show you some of the evidence, and you guys tell me what you think. We're going to start off with side one of this record right here. And the title track, not the title track, but what is this thing called? Love. Cole Porter track. And there's kind of this rolling thunder here. Just this edge of a storm cloud kind of rolling in. Clifford giving you a little bit of color there. And then these guys come in and state the melody here in a second. And I don't want to get this episode taken down, so I'm going to cut the volume out of times. It's such a brilliant mood set. And you should really pull out your copy of this and listen to it so you understand what I'm talking about. And they're about to state a wonderful phrase together. That's Clifford. Listen to Morrow. Fantastic. It's just an and I got so much to show you that I highlighted going through these records yesterday. There's Rollins. And Rollins is kind of easing his way into this. And in a little bit here, and Clifford loves to announce his presence with that fanfare, that it comes down into his phrasings. He's so, here I am. But it's never coming from a place of ego. It's coming from a place of joy, excitement. He seems like full of energy, can't wait to show you what he's got to show you. And that's part of the joy of Clifford Brown. It's just like, it's not about, he does things in a Louis Armstrong kind of way where everything is like so creative and inventive, so rhythmically interesting. And the way he darts through those things. And I'm going to pause this. I want to find you the next part of this. This is the tail end of Rollins here. Now let's listen to some Richie Powell. He does some really interesting things in this. There's a point where he breaks down starts doing these kind of single, McCoy Tyner like almost, you know, and he's just shuffling about. He breaks glass. He's shattering. Some of it's just so complex and spiderwebbed. Like one note. He's playing very single notes here, kind of quarter notes with precision. And then he goes into eighth notes. It's exciting. The melody just kills. Just wonderful. The second track on this MRC record is Love is a Many Splendid Thing. And this is just an exercise in tempo. They state the theme together. And again, there's always an interesting singularity to when Rollins and Brown are playing a line together. It kind of melds into one brass sound. And there's, again, some real percussive staccato things happening here by a band that's super expressive and super emotive. And we're going to watch the tempo just blister here. Miles can't present clean, clear lines like that. Miles can do that kind of cloudy, viscous, dense sound, and he plays fairly smooth in the first quintet. In the second quintet, I feel like Miles kind of reduces himself back to being very minimalist, because he knows he's not going to really hang with Hancock and Shorter. He's going to let those guys do all that, and he's going to always kind of be the wise old minimalist in a way, which he does very well. Moving on to track 3. This is I'll Remember April. And again, the short brush strokes here at points by Rollins, the whole band here actually. It's the diversity of what these guys can do with their attack, with their sound, with their percussiveness, with their aggressiveness, with their restraint. It's all so finite. It's wonderful. This is one of the greatest groups of all time. These guys are such legends, and yet there's no sense of a guy resting on his legend or having their ego say, I am the greatest and everything I do has to be. They're just, we'll just show you. We'll just show you what we're about. And wonderful melodic phrasing there for Brownie. Rollins comes in with some wonderful Rollins-esque beauty. It's a really impressive tour de force. You know, I'm going to show you some more stuff here. We start off side 2 with a Richie Powell song, and it's called Powell's Prances. And it's just unison of fire. Rollins and Clifford together. Max driving. And again, they're stating together the melody. And soon here, Clifford's going to come in like a machine gun with these percussive bursts. He's just spraying fire, laying down cover. Morrow just flying, Max is flying, Richie's filling that space in wonderfully. More fire. More fire. Little bursts of a machine gun. And now Rollins comes in with this creamy filling. It's centered, it's melodic, it's sweet, it's sweeping. As great as Red Garland and Philly Joe, Paul Chambers, Miles, and Coltrane are, there's just aspects of this group that group could not really quite get to. It's a real shame that we don't know where this group was going to go. And of course, some fantastic Richie Powell right there. Just fantastic. The next song is a ballad. And you can hear that's Armstrong. When Armstrong plays a ballad, you sit up and notice. Clifford Brown playing a ballad. That clear tone, the vibrato comes forth. You don't hear his vibrato obviously at up tempo, but it's at these slow tempos where Brownie has this yearning to kind of heal, he feels very holistic, very empathetic to the plight of the world, and he's got this. I think I can make it better if you just listen carefully. And wonderfully, Richie Powell in the background is playing the piano in such a way where it sounds like little bells in a child's crib. It just is a dreamscape. The entire LP on Emercy here. The score, the scene is clean. Another fantastic Tad Dameron arrangement, and it's got a bit of a different feel because Tad Dameron's actually in the session arranging it versus Richie Powell who arranges most of the rest of this record. And then Gertrude's Bounce rounds out this session. I'm going to flip it to the Prestige title now. So again, on Prestige here, this is probably recorded in 55 as well. This is Valse Hot, a fantastic Rollins composition, and something that Rollins kind of came back to at times in his career. Again, they're staying together, Clifford and Sonny, and there's just a wonderful melancholy in that, and there's a wonderful exchange of ideas in the solos. Rollins is almost double timing the RPM here, but he keeps such a melodic sense. And sometimes Coltrane actually loses that. Coltrane has so many notes and so many ideas and so many places he wants to go that the melodic phrasing can get drowned. But Rollins is in peak form. And then you have Clifford, who's just the architect of long, sweeping, dreamy, melodic lines. And being able to change rhythm midstream, to add a triplet, to add a 16th note or 2 or 4. He can just add this percussive quality to his long, clean lines that makes them really hard to replicate, really hard to imitate. Clifford is the greatest player that any genre of music possibly has ever created. He's just such an innovative, you feel his ideas bubbling to the surface and him being able to regurgitate that bubble and put it back out there into our ears in such an effortless way. That's a pleasure. That's a real joy. I believe Kiss and Run is next. And again, some fantastic playing, some real innovative ideas. So this is the intro to Kiss and Run. And they're standing together here. And you hear they're stating the kind of theme of the song. Clifford. Man, it's hard to even. That's what I'm saying. You can't even talk over Clifford. They come back to the theme again. Rollins in the low register, letting that tenor come from its lowest guttural sounds, There it is. They just explode. They just explode. And there's such a viscous continuity between Rollins and Clifford. And all the time Max is back there just propelling everything that's happening in this session. And Pent Up House rounds out this record. It's really a tour de force, as I said already. I'm going to wrap it up here. There's other notes I made yesterday listening to these records, and it's hard to kind of recapture what I'm hearing the first time and trying to cue it up and find it. I did the best I could, but if these guys, Clifford passed shortly after this, and that great car accident that took the great Richie Powell as well, and it was a sad day in jazz when we lost Brownie and Richie Powell. That's the coolest cool you'll ever hear. Listen to Morrow just walking it. It's so the essence of modernity. It hasn't aged at all. Any jazz before this group has a dated sound to it. Whether it's Dizzy, whether it's early Monk, Miles, the Parker recordings, as brilliant and innovative as a lot of that stuff is, there's still something dated to it, to our modern ear. Part of that's recording technologies, but part of it's just this group's innovation. And hard bop kind of starts here with Clifford Brown, and of course Harold Lamb was a part of it, but Sonny Rollins, from some critics' minds, was one of the defining sounds of hard bop. And they're ahead of the curve. Here they are in 54, 55, making sounds that still sound timeless and undated today. And the beginning of modern jazz in so many ways can be kind of brought back to this moment, which is part of greatness, changing the landscape around you. And you have to ask yourself, had Clifford and Richie not been killed in that car accident, where would this group have gone? Obviously, after they pass, they make another record with Rollins. I think Kenny Dorham fills the trumpet chair on this, and this is a steamroller of a record. It's absolutely outstanding. I gotta make sure it's Kenny Dorham, yeah. And on the piano is Ray Bryant. I forgot that's who the piano player was. I was trying to remember last night in bed. Again, a fantastic session showing the brilliance of Max and how brilliant a rhythm player he is, along with Morrow, and Rollins is wonderful. And then Rollins goes on to his own thing. And I think if Brownie had stayed alive, that matchup probably would have lasted a little longer, if not a lot longer. And then, of course, Rollins is on to his magnus opus, Saxophone Colossus, shortly after this as well. And that kind of completes the ascendancy of Rollins in the jazz kingdom with Saxophone Colossus. So you see that right before this moment, his time with Clifford Brown's impacting him. And I'm going to project and say that this potentially could have been the greatest jazz group of all time. And even with only these two records, they're the finest group of all time. They might not be the greatest, but they might be the best. And only the limited body of work prevents them from being the greatest of all time. There's no one would want to get on a stage after these guys. No one. I think Miles would have called him with a headache if he had to go on after Clifford. Coltrane would have been game for the challenge and said, Miles, I'll play your parts too. You know, that's who Coltrane was. Always game. You know, Coltrane, he's rehearsing in his sleep, so playing, he's not worried about that stuff. But Miles was very ego-driven, and Clifford wasn't going to leave you a lot of room to shine. He was going to stomp all over all your ideas before you even play. You're gonna have, what are you going to do? What are you going to get up and do that Clifford already didn't do really well? Better than anybody, you know. So again, it's a tough thing to define, and jazz has so many errors and so many years and so many great players. But for my money, you want to talk about the most impressive cusp direction changing, innovative. And that's the other thing, is what innovations would this group have made going into the late 50s, into the 60s? And would they have made it to the 60s? Probably not. But had they made 2, 3, 4 more records and sessions together, I think we would have learned some interesting things about the brilliance of Clifford Brown and the ability for Sonny Rollins to graft himself into almost any setting. And I think Rollins is in his prime right here. It's his moments here with Clifford, his Saxophone Colossus, and then those Blue Note recordings that come in that same era where Rollins is at his pinnacle. And he comes back in 60, 61 with those RCA records, which are great records. The Bridge is fantastic. I enjoy a lot of those records, a lot. But there's a wild in the wilderness unpredictability and hunger and passion to Rollins here that I'm guessing even his paycheck at RCA was probably triple, quadruple what it was for Blue Note or Prestige or Emerson. And so that lack of desperation, that lack of hunger allows you to play a little more comfortably with Jimmy Hall, or on any of those records. It's RCA also isn't going to give you that same freedom and creative license that the small labels like Blue Note and Prestige and Emerson were giving these guys. And it's no coincidence that the most famous, most legendary records in the jazz canon are always made by the hungriest black men. And most of the innovation that was cerebral, that was intellectual, comes from the white guys. Whether it's Paul Whiteman, whether it's Benny Goodman, whether it's Jerry Mulligan, Jimmy Joffrey, these guys were intellectuals that were trying to splice in math and music and the writability of this music. Jazz was never written down. Jazz was never predictable. What it was off-the-cuff inspiration. And a desperate black man always has something to say. He doesn't need to think about it. He doesn't need to break it down intellectually. He just needs to clear and vacate that. And so many of the greatest jazz records in the canon are those type of statements, and yet most of us as collectors don't even recognize that's what sets them apart. It's not the easygoing records that White Cats made, which there's thousands of them. It's those few desperate incantations, prayers to the universe from these desperate black men struggling in America to get through, that have become the staple and the foundation of what the jazz canon is. And somehow the average jazz fan, or even more concerning, the average non-jazz fan, has gotten themselves convinced that jazz is nothing but intellectuals, and it's only for intellectuals, and it's only meant to be sat there and processed and thought. It's not. It's about feeling. It's about feeling what these cats were inspired to tell you within that moment. Is a byproduct and a distraction. Wonderful playing in jazz was never intellectual. It was always just emotional. And that's how we need to hear jazz, not with our ears and our mind, but with our hearts. Just feel, what's a guy trying to tell me? What is that hunger driving him to say about our lives here in America, about the 20th century, about race, about poverty, about drugs, about women, about sex? Where are these guys coming from? And I feel so few jazz fans, even big jazz fans, post their records on Facebook and say, wow, that record was great. It really made me think about this and feel this. All they want to talk about is their speakers and how good this copy sounds versus that copy. Enough. Pressing talk it's That's the only insight you came away with from that whole session, is this pressing sounds a lot better than that pressing because my speaker said so. What did your heart tell you? If you shut off your mind and shut off your ego that's listening to your $10,000 equipment and just said, man, this is an archaeological find, and what does it tell me about this group of people that lived in that place in that time and era? My name is Dan. I'm the Jazz Shepherd. Check out my Patreon page if you want to support the channel. There's also a great merchandise shop with some great gear there as well that helps and supports what we're doing. And again, it's always about the music and what it makes you feel. Tell me with these Clifford Brown Max Roach records and Sonny Rollins records, what does it make you feel? That's the challenge. Peace.